It's kind of wild, but you probably have more theology downloaded on your phone right now than, like, the greatest saints in history had in their entire
Oh,
lifetimes.
absolutely. I mean, it is a staggering amount of access.
Right. Just think about it for a second. You can stream a sermon while you're picking up your dry cleaning. You can open an app and read ancient texts in multiple languages while just waiting in line for a coffee. We have this absolute ocean of data,
Yeah, we do. But it creates this ultimate modern paradox.
which is what exactly?
Well, we are completely drowning in all this information, yet at the exact same time, we are absolutely parched for actual transformation.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes sense. Because so often our spiritual life just feels like we're running on a treadmill, right? Like
Yeah.
completely out of breath, sweating profusely, but going absolutely nowhere.
Exactly. We've totally equated consuming content with spiritual growth, but the reality we're unpacking today, and this is drawn from a really comprehensive guide called 009 Prayer and Dependence on God.pdfs, it basically flips that entire paradigm upside down.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it poses this radical question that really should stop us in our tracks. It asks, what if the greatest obstacle to spiritual maturity isn't a lack of knowledge at all, but a severe lack of conversation?
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if that's true, it changes the entire scorecard.
It really does.
We are so culturally conditioned to think that if we just, read one more book or find the perfect podcast, we'll finally crack the code to peace or purpose. But the core insight from this deep dive today is that while knowledge informs us, it's actually prayer that forms us.
That's the crux of it, yeah.
So our mission today is specifically for you, the listener. We want to help you bypass all this overwhelming noise and figure out how prayer transitions from being this religious chore, like a box you feel guilty about not
Only
checking.
nobody needs more guilt.
Exactly. We want to see how it shifts into your literal lifeline of dependence on God.
And to get there, we really have to look at the root cause of that exhaustion you just mentioned. Like, why are we running on that treadmill in the first place?
Yeah, why are we so tired?
It comes down to this fundamental human flaw, which the text calls the illusion of independence. The theological premise here is that humanity was engineered from the ground up to live in constant dependence on the Creator.
Okay, so we were literally built for that connection.
Right. But the tragedy of the fall in Genesis, it wasn't just about gaining knowledge, it was really a pursuit of autonomy.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's this deep-seated desire to navigate reality and just call the shots completely apart from God's wisdom.
Okay, so it's sort of like, it's like relying on a GPS device where you've downloaded all the maps. And those maps represent our vast spiritual knowledge, right? But you've intentionally turned off the satellite connection.
I love that analogy. That is spot on.
You have the data, but you have zero real-time guidance. So you still end up getting completely lost because you're driving blind to the current reality.
Yes, and without that satellite connection, which is prayer believers just default to self-reliance. And the text points out that relying solely on human determination, it just inevitably leads to fatigue. It leads to moral compromise and spiritual stagnation.
Because we're trying to run the whole system on our own battery.
Exactly. We end up living these incredibly spiritually busy lives. We're attending services, doing ministry, but underneath all that, we are quietly starving for divine attentiveness.
I want to ask you, the listener, directly. Have you ever felt that exhaustion disguised as faithfulness? Because I know I have.
Oh, totally. It's so common.
That's exactly what happens when we respond to external pressures instead of divine guidance.
Yeah.
But, okay, if the problem is our pursuit of autonomy, the fix has to be reestablishing the connection, right?
Right, turning the satellite back on. But the text argues that most of us are using that connection entirely wrong.
How so?
Well, we tend to treat prayer as a negotiation, like we're trying to persuade God to do something for us.
Wait, hold on. I have to push back on that based on the text. Doesn't the source specifically quote James 1.5?
It does, yeah.
And that verse says, if we lack wisdom, we should ask God, who gives generously. So, isn't asking inherently about trying to persuade God to give us what we want?
What's fascinating here is how the source resolves that exact tension, because it explicitly states that biblical prayer is not about persuading God to adopt our preferred outcome.
It's not.
No, not at all. Instead, it is entirely about alignment. When we ask for wisdom, we are actually acknowledging our own human limitations.
Oh, I see. We're admitting we don't have the answers.
Exactly. We aren't trying to bend divine purposes to our human will. We are opening ourselves up, allowing divine wisdom to actually shape our desires in the first place.
That brings up the ultimate example from the text, which is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Such a powerful example.
Right, because here he is, facing unimaginable physical and spiritual suffering. And he prayed with this brutal honesty to avoid the pain. He literally asked if there was another way.
He did. But look at how he concluded that prayer. Not my will, but yours be done.
And the profound takeaway the text highlights here is that prayer didn't change the path. It didn't magically eliminate the struggle.
No, it didn't.
But what it did do was transform the struggle into surrender. It gave Jesus the strength to actually walk the path.
Which is huge, because once we understand that prayer is about alignment and not just a transactional to-do list, the actual way we pray has to completely change.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like a marriage. If the only time I ever spoke to my partner was to hand them a grocery list or like ask them to fix a problem, the relationship would crumble immediately.
It would be incredibly toxic.
A real relationship requires different types of communication. So what does this conversation actually look like according to the text?
Well, the source breaks down a whole spectrum of prayer forms, and it emphasizes that a healthy spiritual life really requires all of them. The first is adoration.
Which is just praising God.
Right, it's honoring God for who he is, referencing Psalm 145.3. This is crucial because it shifts our focus completely away from our own anxieties and onto God's sovereignty.
Which shrinks the ego, basically.
Exactly. Then you have confession, which is acknowledging our failures and inviting cleansing, much like Psalm 51.
Okay, so adoration, then confession. What else?
Thanksgiving, recognizing past faithfulness. And this is vital because it actually transforms obedience from being this heavy duty into actual joy, like we see in 1 Thessalonians 5.18.
I love that. And then there's the asking part, right?
Yes, supplication and intercession. Asking for ourselves, but also standing in the gap for others, the way Moses did for Israel.
But out of all these, there is one discipline that feels so overlooked. The text mentions contemplation, or listening prayer, and it highlights the story as Samuel saying, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening."
It's definitely the hardest one for modern people.
I mean, how can we possibly do this in today's world? We are surrounded by endless notifications and just constant noise.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text explicitly calls out our modern noisy culture for this exact reason. Listening prayer isn't just about passively sitting around waiting.
It's not just zoning out.
No, it's a highly active, intentional silencing of both external chatter, like the phone, and our own internal anxious chatter.
Oh, the internal chatter is the worst part.
It really is. But you have to quiet that down to recognize the subtle promptings of the Holy Spirit.
Okay.
Without intentionally creating that silence, discernment is just impossible.
Okay, so we know why we need to pray,
What?
and we know how to pray across this whole spectrum. But the friction of daily life is real.
Oh, for sure.
So what does this all mean? How do we actually sustain this in a world that is constantly competing for our attention? Because spontaneous prayer usually fades after a few days.
The text's answer to that is structure. Lasting growth requires actual systems, just like in medicine or engineering.
Right, you don't build a house by just winging it.
Exactly. The text points to Daniel, who prayed 3 times a day. He had a non-negotiable rhythm. So the framework from the source breaks down into 3 parts. First is morning, which is for alignment.
So that's starting the day off right.
Right, starting with adoration and surrender before the chaos hits. Then you have midday, which is for recentering.
Midday is tough. I'm usually eating a sandwich over my keyboard at that point.
And that's okay. It doesn't have to be a long retreat. It's just a brief pause to evaluate your actions against God's will, a quick reset. And finally, evening is for reflection.
Okay, so looking back at the day.
Exactly. That's when you do your confession and thanksgiving.
And to make this actionable, the text recommends some specific tools to overcome the busyness, like habit stacking.
Oh, habit stacking is brilliant.
And pairing prayer with something you already do, like your morning coffee or your commute. But there's also the 30-day prayer journal.
Yes, that is a highly effective tool.
It's not just a diary, right? You track your requests, the scriptures you read, and the observed answers. And the brilliance of the text here is pointing out that writing things down proves to our forgetful brains that God is actually working.
We have such bad spiritual amnesia.
We really do. We forget everything.
Yeah.
So having a written record actively fuels our future trust. But even with the best personal structure and a great journal, we're still prone to spiritual fatigue.
Which is why the text warns that prayer was never meant to be a purely solo endeavor. We need community.
Like the early church, right?
Exactly. Looking at Acts 1.14, the early church gathered constantly in prayer. Doing it together united their vision and really multiplied their impact. The text even explicitly recommends finding a prayer accountability partner.
Someone to help carry the load.
This raises an important question, though. How does this affect those who lead others? Because whether you're leading a family, a business, or a whole church, the text warns that strategic excellence is basically useless without spiritual grounding.
Oh, totally.
Like when the apostles had to replace Judas in Acts 1.24, they didn't just take a vote or look at resumes. They stopped and prayed.
The text really shows that private devotion is the hidden engine of public authority. I mean, Jesus chose his disciples only after spending the entire night in prayer.
He didn't just rely on human networking.
Right. You absolutely cannot lead effectively if you aren't first being led yourself. So, listener, think about the biggest decisions on your plate right now.
Yeah, what's keeping you up at night?
Are you trying to strategic plan your way out of them on your own? Or have you brought others in to seek divine alignment with you?
It changes everything when you do.
It really does. So to wrap up our deep dive today, the journey here is realizing that prayer isn't a preliminary step before the real work. Prayer is the real work.
Absolutely.
It moves us from that exhausting illusion of independence into the reality of true dependence. It shifts us from trying to persuade God to actually aligning with him through this multifaceted, structured, and communal conversation.
And to close this out, I really want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. It builds on that premise we discussed about exhaustion disguised as faithfulness.
Oh yeah, this is the kicker.
What if the persistent burnout you feel in your life right now isn't actually a scheduling problem, but a posture problem? What if true rest isn't found in doing fewer things, but in finally laying down the heavy burden of trying to navigate your life under your own power?
That is exactly the question we need to be asking. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We want to encourage you to take just one decision today and filter it through intentional listening prayer. Turn the satellite connection back on. We'll catch you next time.